scanners. You pray it will end, and it will.
Well, back in the 80s, the slasher films notwithstanding, they weren't really ruled by trends so much. I mean, there were a lot of people doing all different kinds of horror. You had a lot of directors who had kind of started off in low budgets in the 70s, getting discovered by semi-majors like Avco Embassy and being given a chance to do bigger films. You had John Carpenter going from Halloween to The Fog, Escape from New York, and The Thing. You had Joe Dante going from Piranha to The Howling. You had David Cronenberg, who went from Rabid and The Brood up to Scanners and then The Dead Zone. So you really saw a lot of kind of star directors coming up.
Scanners was one that I saw probably too young. My friend and I rented it because of course, the cover art alone. Michael Ironside like this on the cover. I thought, we need to see this movie. Old, I didn't know what I was getting into.
All right, we're gonna do it the scanner way. I'm gonna suck your brain dry. Everything you are is gonna become me.
You can't talk about 80s horror and not mention the Scanner's head blowing up.
When that happens, it is so gruesome and visceral that even as a kid, I was like, this is the coolest thing I've ever seen. Obviously, this is before CGI.
And all of a sudden, homeboy with the glasses just... As a kid, I just went, what the? Gee, Cronenberg, dude!
And just stuff is flying everywhere. And I know they took a shotgun and they used, they filled it up with a bunch of, I think, chicken livers or something and just shot it out. But oh my goodness, did that look so real.
That explosion is probably the shot across the bow of the old guard, just basically saying, okay, we'll take it from here.
So much of those performances in Scanners work because the actor's face has to sell it. So you have Michael Ironside. He's got to basically take all of these themes from the movie and project it through his face. It all hinges on whether or not we believe him, right? And he's so great at it.
Take your pick. My Bloody Valentine.
My Bloody Valentine might be my favorite slasher of 1981. It's just this culmination of characters, whodunit, and at the time especially, it's unique. It's the miners and Valentine's Day.
Roses are red, violets are blue. One is dead, so are you?
The interesting thing about My Bloody Valentine is that it was really graphic with awesome practical effects, but they cut 9 minutes of them out of the film. My favorite kill is definitely one that was cut for the theatrical release. It was this character named Happy, this old drunk guy at a bar, who went out to visit the mine to inspect what was going on. He gets a pickaxe swung up through his chin, and just the effect is so gnarly. And it's one of those kills where I watched it and I'm like, how did they even fake this? One of the things I love about this movie is how authentic it feels, and part of that is because they shot in an actual mine underground. Apparently the mine owners, when they found out that the movie was going to film down there, spent a lot of time cleaning it up, which is the opposite of what the film crew wanted, so they had to re-dirty this actual mine to get the look that they wanted for this movie.
Of course it's cheesy, it's a slasher, all the tropes are there, but there's something about that one that just grabs me. I mean, My Bloody Valentine's got a lot of heart, what can I say?
The Howling.
The early 80s had a shapeshifter trend. Everybody's making transformation monster movies, The Howling, The Beast Within, all this other stuff.
In The Howling, we were trying to get away from the traditional villagers chasing the werewolf template. We wanted to actually position it as a slasher movie because they were very popular at the time, and supernatural movies were kind of not. They were kind of considered a little old hat. So in the first half hour of the picture, there don't seem to be any supernatural elements at all. And so when we finally did introduce the werewolf angle, we did it through watching The Wolfman on television, which is a pop culture reference that audiences could immediately get.
Whoever is bitten by a werewolf and lives becomes a werewolf himself.
That was really kind of the first time that had been done. And then it eventually became very popular with the Scream movies. To have characters who were aware of the tropes of the genre became sort of a genre staple.
Joe Dante loves to put his friends in his films, so you can find his mentor Roger Corman, famous Monsters icon Forey Ackerman, Howling screenwriter John Sayles, good pal Mick Garris, and his lucky charm, Dick Miller.
I remember seeing The Howling and just thinking, oh, finally, like somebody has created a werewolf and done an on-screen transformation that is just absolutely mind-blowingly great.
We had told the studio that we could do a transformation all in one take, which we learned for various reasons was impractical and also wasn't particularly dramatic. We ended up shooting it conventionally with cutaways and stuff.
The character of Eddie Quist, we finally see his full Rob Bottin assisted transformation. Holy shit, look what is happening to this guy.
There's always going to be the great debate between The Howling and American Werewolf in London, and as amazing as the effects in American Werewolf in London are, I think in that scene, I mean, it's all very brightly lit with a lot of close-ups, and to me, it's kind of a special effects reel and not really a dramatic scene. And in The Howling, you have this great shadowy lighting in that scene. You have Robert Picardo's character, who is not a victim. He wants to transform. He wants to show Dee Wallace's character what he really is. And I think that gives it a lot of power.
What we didn't want to do was what had been done before, but that iteration of a guy who has a werewolf head and a werewolf hands and a tucked-in shirt didn't seem to be modern to us. Was always eager to do something new and different. And we tried a man in a suit and ended up photographing like a bear. So we ended up using a combination of puppets and separate legs, and indeed a guy in a suit, but you had to shoot it in such a way that you didn't see his waist. We managed to pull off a pretty good illusion.
The Burning.
I love The Burning. I didn't know about it for years, and then when I found out about it, I was like, where has this been all my life? It's a slasher film at a camp? Like, I need to see this film. Well, first of all, it's got Jason Alexander and Holly Hunter in it, which is just mind-blowing considering the careers they've had since then.
Alfred, this is about to be the greatest moment in your life.
The writing, the way the kids interacted, and of course, Tom Savini's effects. I mean, that whole scene when they're coming up on that raft and he just comes up in front of the sun and just plunges down in the guy's neck. It's one of my favorite slashers.
I love John Landis movies. In general, I just love them. But there's a particular movie like Animal House and American Werewolf in London where he was so skilled at recreating a real environment and a real snapshot in time. It was totally engrossing to me.
A perfect comedy horror hybrid because it starts off lighthearted.
Those sheep shit on my pack.
It's a couple pals, they're walking around, and next thing you know, the one friend is eviscerated by a werewolf, and the other one is slowly transforming into a werewolf.
You'd be surprised what horrors a man is capable of.
Jack, his zombie, corpse that keeps reappearing in front of David, and it's continually becoming more and more decrepit every time it shows up. It's a hilarious performance.
Hi, David. Put that down.
The makeup is just absolutely gross.
Beware the moon, David.
I remember seeing his trachea and feeling like I was looking at an anatomy book.
Jenny Agutter plays a nurse who takes in David Naughton, and their love story really gives an added layer of heart and soul to the film, not to mention some added scares.
It's got certainly horrific moments in it. I mean, the end where he's just in the streets of London running around, I mean, that's scary. And that was done so well. And of course, Rick Baker's werewolf transformation is just, you can't talk about the movie without talking about that, of course.
Rick Baker was originally going to do Joe Dante's werewolf work in The Howling, but John Landis kept him to a promise and scooped him up at the last minute.
When you're going to go see a werewolf movie in the 80s, you're going to see a werewolf become a werewolf out of a man. I actually got queasy at the scene of his foot extending into a paw. It was all fleshy and was stretching, and nothing like that had been done before. It was startling to me to see that transformation. In my mind, will always be a level that really changed the look and the appeal of 80s movies.
It's a classic, and they both came out the same year, along with Full Moon High and Wolfen. You know, I mean, it was a lupine year.
Full Moon High. It's not just another teenage werewolf movie.
I thought I was making the only werewolf film, except for I Was a Teenage Werewolf, which had been done 20 years before in black and white, and AIP owned it, so they weren't going to sue me. I told them I wanted to make a comedy version of it.
Holy shit.
I don't think it was what they really wanted. I guess if you're going to make horror movies, you got to make scary horror movies. Funny horror movies, I don't know. Is the horror audience going to like this? Is anybody going to like this? I liked it. I had a good time. I got to work with Adam Arkin and his father, Alan Arkin, wonderful actor.
I can't believe this. I can't believe my eyes.
I told them to make the werewolf look like Henry Hurrell did in The Werewolf of London. And that's what they did. It was simple. They had a wonderful cast of comedians, and I had a good time making the picture. I can see it now.
Evil Dead scared the crap out of us. Sitting down to watch it, it really unnerved us.
In The Evil Dead, a very young Bruce Campbell has his first starring role. Campbell and Raimi were high school pals who made short films together before going all in on the 30-minute Super 8 film Within the Woods, which is kind of like the first version of Evil Dead, and it was designed to attract investors.
The effects, the practical effects, just the nastiness, and just, you know, her in the basement just like with the trap door going up and down and screaming, and the way they track the camera through the house, it was just so unnerving.
I love the claymation stuff that they did with the melting bodies in there.
Seeing Ellen Sandweiss get like essentially raped by tree branches.
That's a fairly clear analogy of that idea of nature itself being a malevolent force.
The sincerity of it is impossible to fake, because this was just a bunch of kids going out to a cabin in Tennessee and filming what they could with no budget.
They were doing things that you didn't think were possible on such a low budget. I mean, they were so creative.
The most interesting thing about Evil Dead is it came out after the invention of the Steadicam, but they couldn't afford a Steadicam, and so all those shots running through the woods, they just strapped a camera to a couple of 2x4s and had guys on either end of the 2x4s running through the woods with the camera. And it works! The shaky cam is actually scarier than the Steadicam.
This cinema verite effect and the grittiness to it makes it feel almost like a documentary. The Evil Dead is a perfect example of cult film creative genius born out of low-budget necessity.
Halloween 2.
Halloween was conceived by not just John Carpenter, but by Deborah Hill. And you had a very strong woman and her voice in the development of the characters. And I think that has a lot to do with why you like Jamie beyond her own inherent skills, which she is obviously very talented.
After Halloween was a success, partners that I had in the movie wanted to make a sequel. I just didn't think there was any story left. I couldn't stop them from making it. So I figured, well, I might as well go along with them. I wrote the screenplay. It wasn't very good. I didn't do a great job. Now you're repeating gags, and you're just repeating what's happened in one.
This worked once, not this time. I wasn't scared in Halloween 2. I was just grossed out.
You know, it's ironic that the original Halloween inspired so many countless dozens of imitations.
Right.
And for 2 years, we got nothing but movies in which their only ambition was to litter the screen with dead teenagers.
Right.
Now we get Halloween 2, and it's a pale imitation of the imitations. It's not worthy of the original film.
Not until the very last sequel recently did we have actually a new story to tell. So I was disappointed in it, and disappointed in what I did. I didn't want to direct Halloween 2.
Rick Rosenthal is now directing instead of John Carpenter, and Dick Warlock replaced Nick Castle wearing the Shatner mask.
Nick Castle was not asked to return as the Shape. One of the big flaws.
I think by that time I had already directed, so they had no even reason to think I'd want to be the Shape again, and nor would I have probably done it at that point. Deborah came to me and said, Nick, do you have the mask from the first one? Because for whatever reason, we've tried to redo it again and we can't get it right. So I said, oh yeah, I got it here. It's in my living room. She took it and never gave it back, unfortunately. But I'm sure it would be powder by now anyhow, so what the hell.
Jamie Lee Curtis was a real sport in this film, since she essentially had to go it alone without the support structure she had in her breakout hit in 1978. Plus, since she cut her hair for another movie, she had to wear a wig that, once you notice it, you can't unsee it. Contained mostly in the Haddonfield Hospital, the film follows the standard slasher formula much closer than the groundbreaking original, with more creative kills and much more gratuitous nudity. I think the most memorable kill from Halloween 2 is probably the nurse who gets her head dunked in the boiling hot tub, but for me, my personal favorite is actually the other nurse who gets the scalpel in the back and just raised off the ground.
My buddy from The Last Starfighter, Lance Guest, plays a prominent role in there. I didn't realize until I saw it again how big a role he had. And he survived, I think.
I guess Michael Myers had to take a break to recuperate after getting torched at the end of Halloween 2. But he'd come back after the collective what the fuck of Halloween 3.
Ghost Story.
Ghost Story is based on the Peter Straub novel, and it stars Hollywood legends Fred Astaire, Melvin Douglas, John Houseman, and Douglas Fairbanks Jr. as the Chowder Society.
The Chowder Society.
Basically a bunch of old dudes sharing horror stories.
The grave had been disturbed, the soil was upset, and the cross lay on its side.
Of course, John Houseman similarly tells ghost stories by a campfire at the beginning of John Carpenter's The Fog.
Maybe that's why I grew up loving stories. That movie is like such a great marriage of old time stories. It brought that into the 80s at a time where we weren't really seeing that. The transition of Alice Krige throughout that movie is absolutely horrifying, where she starts off as this beautiful woman, sort of fluttery and flirty and full of life and very much sort of just a carelessness to her carriage. And by the end, once things are revealed with her functionality in this film, you know, it's such an interesting descent.
Aren't you even going to say hello?
Ghosts in movies are so hard to pull off. And I don't think anybody had pushed this idea of ghosts the way that Dick Smith had pushed them in Ghost Story. Dick Smith, who is a guy who's best known for his work on The Exorcist or even The Godfather, at this point in the 80s, like, he was stepping back a little bit while this new talent was coming forward, but yet still was out there making memorable creations. And obviously we see that in Ghost Story. It was something completely different than we had seen before. Yeah, I love that movie a lot.
One of the really great things about 1980s horror movies was that everything happened in front of the camera. There was no such thing as CGI yet. An actor was interacting with either an actor covered in latex or puppets or things that were really in the frame with them.
Humans are such easy prey.
There was an artistry of the special makeup effects geniuses of the time, the Rick Bakers and Tom Savinis and Steve Johnsons and all of these people who really launched their careers during that time. You get your first Oscar for makeup, and it was An American Werewolf in London in 1981.
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank the Academy for creating this new category, and I'm very proud to be the first winner.
Yes. When I think of 1980s horror, that's, to me, one of the best things about it.
Once they saw what you could do, it was like all bets were off, and everybody wanted to go out and make horror movies, which is exciting.
good game, boy.
Filmmakers realized that the tools that they had at their disposal allowed them to create bigger and bigger worlds, bigger and bigger moments.
It's just such a vibrant, alive, new time because we had materials and we had techniques and we had all of these movies that were being made that gave us an opportunity to push the envelope.
I love the magic of the movies and the magic of theater. How we take a situation and make it look how we want it to look, to make you believe what I want you to believe.
What sticks in your mind the most is how did they do that? You become interested in the illusion and the magic that's happening behind the scenes, and that gets you interested in filmmaking.
The reason that Tom Savini, the reason that Stan Winston, the reason that Rick Baker and Rob Bottin were the visionaries that they were and still are, was because they approached all of these effects as if they were magic tricks. And a lot of it is misdirection.
In-camera effects are always much more impactful. However, they're very expensive to do. They're very, very time-consuming.
If you do them right, practical effects are much more powerful.
How do you build a better werewolf? How do you build a better decapitation? I mean, these are things that still obsess me. 30 some years later, this is still my work. There's an almost sort of childlike aspect to what we do that I feel very grateful for.
This is impressive art. This is impressive stuff. And it drives and propels the story and those visceral reactions that you have to horror.
You're always trying to sort of push things beyond the realm of good taste and sometimes even beyond the realm of possibility. You want to do impossible things. You shouldn't be limited to what's possible. You should be able to make the audience believe something that is impossible is happening right in front of them.
Everything was on the table. You could really do whatever you want. The only thing that you would have to contend with was the ratings board. It was always a fight because the directors felt they had creative freedom to tell the story and do whatever they wanted to do. And of course, there were people that found some of the subject matter and some of what we did offensive.
A certain amount of blood, you're going to get an X, and X means the distributor can't release in almost all the theaters at once, so you've got a very small release, which means very small profit. So you have to be mindful of that. I've helped several films get X ratings because of the violence and the blood. Often they'll resubmit it, they'll cut out a few frames here, a few there. Finally, you might get an R rating. It was often this fear of getting an X rating, so they would go with blood that wasn't red right from the beginning, like in Phantasm or Evil Dead 2.
There's such a focus on blood and gore, particularly in movies in the 80s, and to be honest with you, I never quite got it. Once filmmakers got into that whole blood thing and the bloodletting, and it became bigger and bigger, and like who can outdo the other person, and and that's fun, but to me it wasn't quite as realistic as what happens in real life.
The effects artist creating stuff usually knows best how to shoot it. Some things can be shot from a certain angle, they work best not from this angle. And, a good director is going to trust their effects people, but if you shoot it from something a little bit different, it's going to reveal itself to be the magic trick, and you don't want to ever show the rabbit in the hat.
There was so much work that everybody was keeping busy, and it never felt like competition. It felt more like a coexistence. We all had the same backgrounds. We all grew up reading famous monsters of film, and we all grew up making movies with our Super 8 cameras, and there was a sort of a shared heritage in what got us to where we were at that point.
In the early 80s, Fangoria magazine came out, and now we had a group of people that were celebrating the actual special effects makeup of those movies.
Before it was like, yeah, you're a guy, you do special effects, that's cool, but then Fangoria really made this like cult of personality around them because they really focused on the work they were doing because it was so innovative and so different and also so graphic.
They printed the pictures that no one else would print. It wasn't the fangs that the kids wanted, it was the gore. And they had pictures of, bloody corpses and people slashed throats and tongues hanging out and stuff. And I wouldn't exactly call it porn, but it had the same effect in a way, because it was a high for kids, and they would see it so forbidden, and it was so transgressive.
Fangoria was the authority on what's about to come out and what do you need to see. Without an internet, without an endless resource of images at your fingertips, you would stare at that fucking Fangoria until the pages fell apart.
Fangoria had a lot of trouble in the early days getting taken off of newsstands and things like that because the imagery was too shocking or bloody or whatever.
Fangoria, Cinefantastic, Cinefex, an American cinematographer. Yeah, those were my little Bibles every month. It was a wonderful way to see how other effects were being done, what films are being done, a great teaching tool. And everybody in special effects and special makeup effects was reading all those magazines.
It actually generated more interest because somebody would watch that movie, or they'd see some behind the scenes story, and they'd say, wait, what? You did what with yak hair? And they'd go see the movie, and they'd suddenly realize, wow, that's cool. I understand how it all comes together. And look, and I'm seeing it now, and I'm believing it, and it's a monster, and I'm buying it.
I think a lot of the special effects in the 80s movies have aged well. You're doing it live, really, essentially, in front of the camera. They're practical effects. There's something about CG that I think makes it seem distant and it's not really happening in front of you.
Actors would prefer to work with something they can see and react to rather than a green ball on a stick.
I would be hard-pressed to pick the all-time great 80s practical effect, but chances are Rick Baker did it.